Making a next-gen console is easy, unless you're Nintendo. They don't have the best track record when it comes to new console releases. Sure, the Switch came out the gate swinging and going into its 7th year is still selling extremely well, but Nintendo seems to have a curse going from one console gen to another. Nintendo has said that the Switch will revolutionize how we thought about console generations, and they're ramping up production again, 7 years in. It's crazy to think about what their next gen console could be, especially since we're so entrenched in this current generation, if Nintendo even considers it that. Regardless, they have to be releasing new hardware soon, right? Hello world and all who inhabit it, it is I, the Great Saiyaran, and the Switch may just be my favorite console ever. From its massive library focusing on well-established first-party titles, as well as new and experimental indie releases, to the modularity of the system and the sheer amount of accessories you could buy for the thing. I love the Switch, but just like everything you love, you want the best from it, and the Switch as it is far from the best. The Switch was novel and changed the way we view gaming, but as time progressed, other companies figured out how to play Nintendo's game. Consoles like the Steam Deck and Ioneo are always brought up as competition to the Switch, and while they're comparable, I don't think they're actually competitors. The Steam Deck does have some things we'd like to see in the Switch, but as soon as Nintendo catches up to those, I really don't think they're as much as a competitor as people think. Nintendo's naming schemes are genuinely good, with the Wii U being the most regrettable. The Switch branding is already huge, so when we're talking about a next-gen console, I vote to call this thing the Super Nintendo Switch. It's close enough to the Switch to be recognizable, but different enough for consumers to know that this is a different product. We all know the next Switch needs to be more powerful, but that kind of goes without saying. I'm not really a graphics snob as much as I am a frame rate snob. I tolerate the Switch's frame rate because it's so convenient to play games on the go, but hitting a solid 60 FPS in Nintendo's own titles would be pretty good. I'm sure they find a way to promote a 4K experience, but I don't really see Nintendo leaning into that too much, especially at the price that they want to sell this thing at, which I think could be $400. The baseline Switch was selling for that price during the pandemic when the Switches were sold out and extremely rare. People didn't think twice about grabbing one, and I'm sure Nintendo noticed. Also, the OLED is $350 and they only really added a screen. Them putting in new hardware and new features, I'm thinking this thing's gonna touch $400. But I have a few more ideas besides naming, price, and performance. The first thing the Super Nintendo Switch needs is 100% backwards compatibility. I've seen people argue against this, but everything Nintendo has been doing with their online account system and talking about how the Switch will be a family of systems just points towards backwards compatibility. They've been hit or miss with this in the past, with the GameCube not playing any Nintendo 64 games, but the Wii playing GameCube games, and the virtual consoles on the Wii U and 3DS playing those classic older titles. If you want a more enhanced version, then Nintendo might remaster the game and sell it for another $60 or $70. If you just want to play everything you already have just on one system, I can see them making this complicated, but not impossible. If you still want to be skeptical, that's fine, I totally get it. Games don't all have to run better than they did on the original Switch, but a performance patch for certain games would be pretty nice. If I had to put a Nintendo spin on it, I'd say that they'd have digital backwards compatibility, but the physical cartridge might not fit in the same slot. I like how the 3DS did it with the cartridge slot for DS games being inside of the 3DS slot, but there's no guarantee Nintendo would do this, especially with how popular digital games are nowadays. Back compat is a must, and limiting it to digital games only is Nintendo enough for it to make sense. Before we talk about what else I want for Nintendo's next console, let's look back at the previous releases and how they screwed them up. Skipping the NES and SNES, let's start with the Nintendo 64. The Nintendo 64 wasn't a huge success and was seen as a commercial failure, selling only 33 million units. It still helped bring console gaming to the masses, and its games are still seen as extremely influential despite the low sales number. The problem here is that Nintendo still used cartridges even though the market was moving towards discs. Those cartridges were expensive to make and couldn't hold as much data, so third parties would make games for the PlayStation that they couldn't physically put on the Nintendo 64, like Final Fantasy VII. The GameCube was next, selling even less than the 64. At 22 million units, the mini disc were its downfall. They were a weird choice to use, and the competition was using DVD-CVDs, a popular and added-in feature Sony used to help them push their console, the PlayStation 2. The GameCube was a powerhouse, but it wasn't supported as much by third parties, and though Nintendo has had some amazing first-party titles like Metroid Prime, it wasn't enough. I have a lot of nostalgia for the GameCube. It was my first console and where I fell in love with video games. I really wish more people could experience it. The Wii sold over 100 million units and was a runaway success, yet it was the first Nintendo console I never owned. They took full-size discs, but they weren't DVDs. Had a huge library of games that appealed to everyone, but more so the casual audience than the hardcore gamer. And they had those really sweet motion controls, but that didn't translate well in every single game. This is where Nintendo began to be seen as a kiddie console that can't play any real games. The Wii was so successful, Nintendo thought they could use that momentum with the Wii U. That system stunk, selling only 14 million units. It didn't have first-party games or third-party games, games, and everyone thought it was an accessory for the Wii, not a next generation console. They parted ways with that pretty quickly to release the Nintendo Switch we have today, which has sold over 114 million units and it's still selling. That's unheard of. If you look back, you see that Nintendo tends to Nintendo and fumble the bag on these releases, whether it's not having enough titles to support the console, having a weird and wacky feature that ends up hurting them, or just really confusing marketing. But let's get back to what they actually should do with their next Switch. One of the coolest things about the Switch is how personal you can make it to you. I love its modularity with Joy-Cons both official and third party. There's even a company making a GameCube controller and it looks amazing. Get subscribed because I'll be reviewing that as soon as it gets in. My Switch is so specifically my Switch and I really want Nintendo to keep that, but the Joy-Cons gotta go. It's really the shape of them. I get why they have to be as compact as they are and forego ergonomics to be able to keep a low profile and fit in the bag, but at least get rid of the Joy-Con drift. There are companies that have made ergonomic Joy-Cons that are both comfortable to use and more or less compact. I've even talked about a pair of officially licensed Joy-Cons, so it's possible for Nintendo to do it themselves and they know it. Instead of letting third parties create those controllers, I'd really like a first party pair straight out the box, and as we understand the system more, people can make whatever accessories they want. I love the idea of the Joy-Con and being able to make each side its own controller. I don't want to lose any of those aspects of the Nintendo Switch, but I just don't want to get carpal tunnel after playing for a few hours. One of the things Nintendo is super behind on is their online. I believe they've just updated the infrastructure and games like Monster Hunter Rise make use of the NPLN netcode, but in general, Nintendo needs more when it comes to its online offerings. Games like Splatoon 3 use NPLN, but it only takes a short Twitter search to see people have connectivity issues and difficulties with drop matches in this game. Also, I wouldn't mind paying more for a yearly subscription to Nintendo Switch Online if it meant that they added GameCube, Game Boy, and Game Boy Advance, as well as having a good enough netcode that more popular multiplayer games could come to the system and me not be at a blatant disadvantage like I am in Apex Legends on the Switch. Whoa, my game is like totally glitched out. I don't know how easy it is or how long it'd take to fix their online infrastructure since they haven't prioritized it for years, but adding consoles to the Nintendo Switch Online can't be as hard as they're making it. Nintendo has some of the richest and most played backlog of games through their storied history. I'd pay a separate fee to have quality emulation of the games I played as a kid. I would have expected Nintendo to drop this by now, but maybe they're waiting on the Super Nintendo Switch. It's not really that hard. We don't need anything different or a new gimmick, we just want a Switch, but better. The market is starting to see the value in handhelds and more companies are hopping on the trend. From Valve and their Steam Deck to Verizon and Razer and their strange device I'll also be checking out on this channel. Let me know what you'd like to see in the Super Nintendo Switch or whatever Nintendo decides to call this thing. Be sure to check out some of my other videos like how Square Enix ruined a certain Final Fantasy game. Also be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.